Welcome to the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. My name is Natalie Nidham. I'm a nutritionist, a human potential and epigenetic coach, and I created this podcast to bring you the latest ways to take control of your health and longevity. We cover it all, from new technology to ancestral health practices, personalized interventions, and a very special interest of mine, peptides. Enjoy the show. In today's episode, I get to interview Dr. Moshe Szyf, who's a holder of PhD from the Hebrew University and is a pioneer in the field of epigenetics and the inventor of the first patent on DNA methylation patterns and cancer. And this is just really the tip of the iceberg on his achievements. Trust me on this one. In any event, Dr. Moshe Szyf is also the founder of the company HKG Epitherapeutics, which is the company behind the Epi Age test, a test that compares your biological age to your chronological age by looking at methylation markers on your DNA. So in plain English, what does that really mean? What that means is that the age that's on your driver's license is representative of, well, how much time you've spent on this planet. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't actually give you any insight into how quickly or slowly you might be aging. And this is what these tests are now going to do for us. They're going to help to give us insight into how fast or how slowly we're aging relative to our chronological age. And what is that affected by? Really, it's affected by our lifestyle, our habits, our nutrition, all of that stuff that we talk about all the time. And moving forward, we're hoping that they're also going to be greatly affected by all of these different anti-aging or healthy aging interventions that we are adopting. So whether it's using resveratrol or whether it's adopting a carnivore diet or a vegan diet, whatever side of the fence you happen to be sitting on, not only do you get to see how you feel, but now we're going to get into a world where we might be able to have these tests that give us insight into how our bodies are responding in terms of our speed of aging. So as you can imagine, this is a fascinating topic, and it's really, it's still very young as a science, but I think that we're at the point now where we can start to use it with a grain of salt, of course, but definitely as I go with in my discussion with Dr. Moshe Szyf, is that what's really interesting here is that we're really being invited to join in on a big lab experiment, if you will. As we provide information to these companies, they put it through their computers, they crunch the AI, always with anonymity insured. Have no fear. Your name's never associated with your data. We then start to gather information and we start to understand beyond how does this affect us personally, are there major trends that can be identified from all these different interventions that people are taking? So I hope you enjoy this episode. Dr. Szyf also has a great TED Talk that I invite you to look up, and I'll actually put the link to that in the show notes. Plus, there will be links in the show notes to ordering a test for yourself if you decide you want to jump on this bandwagon, along with the discount code for you. So enjoy the show and make sure to leave this show a rating and a review if you're enjoying it. It really helps us. It helps me. And leave your comments. Also, if you're looking to connect with me, you can find me on Facebook at Biohacking Superhuman Performance or through my website, natalienidham.com. Natalie with an H, by the way, Nathalie. Anyway, without further ado, let's chat with Dr. Szyf. Szyf holds a PhD from the Hebrew University. He has postdoctoral fellowship in genetics at Harvard Medical School. He's currently a professor at McGill University. He is a pioneer in the field of epigenetics. And it goes on, you hold a bunch of patents in epigenetics and DNA methylation in cancer, psychiatry. So welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing.
Thank you for inviting me.
The company that you have founded and currently own, and I think it's one in a series, is HKG Epitherapeutics. And HKG Epitherapeutics has put out a test to market called the Epi Age test. And so the epiAge test is a new test, or relatively new test, in this field of people starting to gain an understanding about how old their DNA says that they are versus how many years they've spent on this planet. So I'm going to stop talking now. And Dr. Szyf, why don't you tell us a little bit about the test and what drew you? Because this is not I don't believe this is your central passion, this whole epigenetic aging thing. So
right.
I'm done.
So I've spent my entire scientific career working on, essentially the mini computer of our lives, which is the DNA. And the DNA we get from our parents and from our father and mother, actually 50% from our father, 50% from our mother. And we inherited it from billion years of evolution and human evolution from our ancestors. But DNA by itself, which is what we call genetics and what you hear about genetic tests, is all about the DNA, is all about what we inherited. But DNA is like the operating system of our mini computers that run our lives. And just for example, we have billions of cells in our body. Essentially, every cell in our body does different things. And it has to do them very, very accurately and very, very robustly, so we will be able to function in this world. So everything in our computer is timed in space and time. So we function differently when there's light than when it's dark, when it's hot than when it's cold. We react to social environments differently. And so this amazing perfection of the computers that run our body depend on software, like any computer. And, in a modern language, we call them apps. Like you buy your phone, it has an Android software. This is what we got from father and mother. But then apps have to be built to run a heart, to run a lung, to run an immune system, and to make sure that our phone functions, because a phone just with operating system can't do anything, right? And so during gestation, when we are in the womb of our mothers, an amazing system in our cells is writing programs in our DNA, writing the software. So when a baby comes out of the womb of his mother, he already has eyes and legs and brains and lungs and livers and kidneys. It's amazing. And all of them know exactly what to do because they have the right software. When this software breaks down, we get disease. So almost every disease, in the end of the day, it could be started by genetic causes, like we inherited some bad mutation from our ancestors. It could be by environmental causes. But in the end of the day, it has to change this mini computer. And so almost every disease process involves a disruption of the script that is running the software. And therefore, DNA methylation is one of the scripts that gives us an insight into what's going on in our mini computers.
Right.
And we today know how to read that script. We can read it extremely accurately. We can read actually every note on that script. And what we're doing is trying to compare scripts of sick and healthy people to try to find out what goes wrong with the script so we can predict disease. What was found, what was discovered in the last 40 years is that script not only tells us if we're sick or healthy, it also tells us how many years we're living in this world, or perhaps even how many years do we have left. And amazingly, in many, many tissues in our body, the same script is written that is connected somehow to our age. And so Horvath was the first to actually describe this as a clock when he described the first notes of the script that move exactly according to our age, but not exactly. Because we have two ages, really. One age is what's written in our passports or IDs. It's our birth date. But we all know that not all people live the same life. Some people die when they're babies. Some people live till 115. So that means we have the capacity to live at least 115 years, because we know people who live 115 years. But not everybody lives 115 years. So we know that we have really two clocks. One is the Gregorian date clock.
Right.
And one is the one that ticks in our own body. And the question was in medicine, if we can understand our clock, can we make it move faster or slower? Of course, we all want it to move as slow as possible. So by looking at those clocks that are in our script, that programs our DNA, we can have a handle on something deeper than just your birth date, as predicting, how many years you have left. And studies have shown that these clocks are actually good predictors of lifespan. And one has to understand that there's a big difference between being sick and dying. Mm-hmm. Some people can be sick for 100 years.
Yeah.
And some people are sick for like a very short time and die.
Yeah.
And so what perhaps, we always connect death to disease, but perhaps death is an entity by itself. And what these clocks are teaching us is that death is something that transcends disease. For example, that clock predicts death from any cause. Could be mental cause, could be heart attack, could be diabetes, could be, cancer. So that means there's beyond all the diseases that we have to deal with, there's something that defines our longevity. And of course, this has huge potential, right, to guide us, to serve as a red flag that things are not going well. Mm-hmm. If we see that our biological clock is ticking faster than we think it is, mm-hmm. Perhaps there's some things we can do. And that's why we are interested in it. And the specific clock we were using is a different one that Horvath is using. And it came about by examining the scripts on the DNA. And we had two interests. We wanted to make it affordable. Mm-hmm. So we asked, what's the minimum that we need to get an accurate clock rather than maximum? And we wanted to make it very easy. That is, it has to be in saliva, not blood.
Okay.
Because pricking yourself to take blood is a medical step. Although there are kits, now approved by the FDA mm-hmm. for people to do it themselves, it still requires an FDA, approval, which complicates things.
Sure.
Saliva is the easiest material to shed, maybe similar to urine or, but easier in volume than urine, and could be sent to labs. So we could have a commercial product rather than a medical product, because we don't see it as a medical product at this stage. We see mm-hmm. it as a consumer product.
Yeah, more of a lifestyle. Yeah.
More of a lifestyle. Maybe one day we'll understand the full medical implications and we'll go through, the FDA or similar processes to find a clear medical indication for this. At this stage, there's no medical indication. It's more like a self-learning process. It mm-hmm. just gives you some information about yourself that can guide you or can point you to doing things.
Okay, I have a question for you. So
sure.
when you're looking at saliva,
yes,
and this is going to be, obviously what we're talking about here also is the epigenetics, right? The
right.
external environment right. and the internal environment influence right. on the expression of our DNA.
Right.
When you're looking, and I've always wanted to ask this question, so I'm so excited I get to answer it today, ask
right.
it today, is when you're looking at these methylation markers, is this a general aging of the system, or does it relate back to specific organ systems? Is it possible to look at, is it like, what's dragging me down? Is it my heart? Is it in general, we talked earlier, the immune system is central to human
right.
health and longevity.
Right.
But obviously, as you were just saying, it could be an issue with the cardiovascular system or something else. So when we're looking at the methylation of the DNA, is there at this stage of the game a way to identify where the deficiencies
right.
are, if you will?
So the specific marker that we're looking at seems to be not very tissue specific. So it gives a more general indication of the aging of your system.
Okay.
But having said that, saliva has a very high percentage of immune cells, right? Because the immune cells from our circulation, like they find themselves in blood, they also find themselves in saliva. So it probably is a good representation of the immune system. But we know that there are cell-specific clocks as well as, mm-hmm. so some tissues can age faster than others.
Yeah.
And if they're critical tissues, that could be critical. So there's a lot to do. right? And to find, tissue-specific clocks. The problem with tissue-specific clocks, they're very inaccessible. So the only real clock,
yeah.
right? So we're not going to chop our liver and, to test the clock or the brain, or even though there might be very important clocks going on there, we
Sure.
just have no access to them.
Okay.
But the system that we have the most access to is the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because it's in blood, it's in saliva, and that system is probably involved in almost every human disease. So if the immune system ages, it's probably a very bad sign.
Okay. And so that's interesting. So when people are, so one of the, well, aside from affordability, one of the key differentiators between the Epi Age test and some of the other tests on the market right now is those guys are all looking at 353 markers that Dr. Horvat identified as these markers. You guys are looking at, I think, less than 20.
Right.
And so how is that different? Like, are they also essentially gauging general systemic and immune?
Right. The Horvat clock is a general one. Yeah.
As well. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And our clock and Horvat clock are very correlated, right? So they're not different.
I know. Yeah. Like talking to David, who's
they're very correlated. But I'm not saying that there are no other clocks, if people will look, and I'm sure every cell has its own clock. And so there are probably billions of clocks. And what we're seeing is a statistical clock, right? That averaged the many clocks in the tissue, in the system.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And so, so let's talk about so, I mean, you know what, we can take my test, for example, as a start, as a talking point, and then take it from there. So I guess, I mean, so basically I ran my test. It came back and said that I am just about 2 years older than my chronological age. So my chronological age, from when I was born to today is almost 57 years.
Right.
My results came back that I am 59.5 years old. So of course, given what I do, I was crushed. I wanted to be younger.
Yeah.
But then the next number that the app gives me is that on average, based on the testing you've done so far, someone in the general population who shows up with a 59.53 epigenetic age, on average is 52 to 53 years old. Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, it's a good thing for me, given all of the things and gizmos that I own, that I am better than the average population. We know, unfortunately, that most people are walking around, in some state of people aren't taking care of themselves very well. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is, what are the most effective ways that we know of so far to either, for people like me, to try and, can I turn it back, or slow it down, as it were? And do you have any opinions on that?
Yes. So, in our website, if you look, we also have an app, and that app gives, certain questions, but also recommendations that are based on what science and medicine know today. And they're based on recommendations of the American Heart Association, Cancer Association, diabetes. And so we know that there are multiple behaviors that are, on average, helpful. Like, for example, exercising is definitely helpful. Yeah. There are certain diets that are more damaging than others. There are certain mental states that are more damaging than others. For example, stress is probably not very good for you. Mm-hmm. And depends what stress, right?
Well,
so we know that positive stress,
Yeah.
For example, if you have a top-notch job and you're responsible, and it's probably positive stress. But if you're constantly in the bottom of the ladder and you're being harassed by all your bosses from the top down, and then you come home and you're harassed by your family, all this is very damaging. Sure. So these things we know. And of course, our life is a balance of all of the above. Mm-hmm. So somebody might be a great jogger and exercise and eat the best food, but he's super stressed because of that, and that kind of outweighs what he has done. So, and the app tries to convey this message that, it's a complex formula, and therefore we can learn by changing certain things, what is working for us. Of course, we would love to share it anonymously so that people can share their experiences with each other. Mm-hmm. And of course, we personally don't care who you are as a person, but we want to average out those behaviors, using modern techniques of machine learning, etc. Is what is a good combination, what is a poor combination. And we have to understand that life is complex. So it's all a combination of things. There's some genetics, of course, involved. There's some economics involved. There's some, education involved. There's some. So life is a complex bag, and so there is no simple solution.
Sure.
It's a learning process.
Sure.
And by feedback learning, by learning what works for us, and that's the idea of multiple testing, and that's why the test has to be simple. So you don't do it once in a lifetime. Like genetics is once in a lifetime, right? If you have a mutation, you have it. Now, there's nothing else you can do with this test except know it and try to change things. But another test is going to help you. Here, it actually tells you what is your DNA thinking about what you're doing. Is it accelerating or decelerating?
Right.
And so the best judges are people themselves, right? So there's so much that medical science can do. And I think each person is an experiment by himself, is a system by himself, and each person, of course, cares about himself or herself. So it's upon you to do the learning process by taking what's there and learning and making mistakes and learning from your mistakes and improving.
Well, that's interesting because the group of people, so one of the reasons why I started this podcast is because I started about a year ago, I started a Facebook group called Biohacking Superhuman Performance. And a lot of the people who will listen to this interview are people from that community. Right. And that community is they're the quintessential N of one experimenters on the planet. Like these are the people who are, if I take metformin, will this help me to be healthier? Not as an anti-aging medication. And I know that, I think it was Dr. Horvat last September published a study that showed that, and I mean, it was a minuscule study. It was like 8 white guys. So first of all, it could not be, it was interesting because they took, DHEA, metformin, and growth hormone, and showed that, I don't fully remember the results of the study, but it was enough for people to say, well, wait a minute, if we can slow that clock down, if we can turn the clock back, and mainly in that case, by influencing the immune system, can everybody else be doing that? Because what you were speaking to earlier, obviously, is meditation. We know that meditation is one of it's actually, when people were talking about telomeres, one of the only ways really safely to prevent those telomeres from shortening, start meditating, right? Appropriate exercise. Diet's interesting because, I've been studying genetics and epigenetics for a while. It would appear that it's not the same diet that's going to really be best for every single person. So a certain degree of personalization. Sleep is the other one, which, if people aren't sleeping, that clock's going to be spinning double time. So in the area of slowing down the clock or turning it back, I guess the first step for people is going to be to get themselves at least to a baseline, to a state of balance, of homeostasis, if you will. And then do you have any opinion, once you're eating, sleeping, basically exercising, managing your stress, and one of the things you were talking about is people in certain very toxic environments, like physical environments, like very polluted cities. As a population, their epigenetic age is going to be more advanced, correct?
Yes, in general, right? But again, even in the most polluted cities, there's some people who for some reason live to 100 years, right?
Right.
And in the most nicest environment, there's some people that drop dead in their 30s. Absolutely. And so, this is a complex system. Mm-hmm. And the only approach to that system is by first recognizing that. So there is no one solution. And then the only way the system works is by self-enforced learning. right? Reinforced learning. So you try something, you feel it, you change it, you try again. So you are an N of one, but technology can now share those experiences across millions of people. And there must be somebody else in the world that is very similar to you.
Right.
And by weighing the differences, within a learning, a machine learning environment, or what we call artificial intelligence, we can derive some conclusions, right? So, for example, and then adjust it to you. So put your lifestyle into the equation, and then compare it with the general models and see what's missing there. And again, you reinforce your learning. So this is the dream, the ultimate dream. And I think it's feasible with current level of understanding of complex systems. Of course, this is getting better and better. So the great revolution will come from mathematics, really, and from technology.
Yeah.
Because all the medical experiments that we have today are based on very small numbers. So the biggest clinical trial will be 30,000 people, but that's nothing compared to the universe, right? This might be not even representing anything, because it doesn't capture the complexity of humans. And that's why many times a drug does extremely well in a clinical trial, even with 30,000 people, and then you start selling it and people die. And because you can capture everything, so a drug might work on 99% of the people, but you don't care. You're the 1%, right? And that's because things are complex. And because medical science traditionally has not addressed this complexity because it didn't have the tools.
Right.
It didn't have access to the number of people it needed. It didn't have the technology to analyze, right? So most clinical trials are case control, which is we try to find like the perfect matches between the control and the test group. So it's simple mathematics, it's comparing two groups. But it's actually a trillion groups.
Right.
And that's the problem. But I think with modern technologies, this becomes more tractable, is to collect a huge amount of data, recognizing complexity and trying to understand how they interact with each other, and trying to put your own data into this big machine and seeing what is missing for you. So I think this is definitely where many big companies are going, and the whole field of artificial intelligence. And I think, we want to be in this game as well. And I think the second idea here is that the idea of sharing. And I don't know if you use the Waze, for example, for navigating. And the reason it worked is because people share.
Yeah.
And the reason people share is because they get benefit out of it, right? Very few people would just share for fun of sharing. People feel that if I share, I give you information, you give me information, and I can figure out which street I should take. Right? It's amazing. And that is only possible because of artificial learning.
Right.
And because of machine learning. Because we as humans, there's too many calculations. We wouldn't be able to do it. And so why not create a Ways of health, where we all share? So of course there are tremendous roadblocks. One of them is data safety and privacy, right? Yeah. So how do we balance? And of course there's all degree greedy groups there, greedy governments, greedy companies that will want to use this kind of data against you rather than for you. Or
at least for their own gain.
Or for their own gain, which, if they gain and you gain, who cares, right? The problem is if they gain and you don't gain, right? Yeah. And I think that's the issue. And that's why sharing works. Whereas if a company will just take your data and never give you anything back, it won't work. In the end, there will be a rebellion against it. And we are at this transition state. So it's not just, medical revolutions that will create the next revolution. It's computational revolution, it's technological revolution, but it's also legal and ethical revolutions, right? How do we figure out a way to balance, privacy versus sharing? Right? You don't want to tell everybody about your diseases. On the other hand, it could be extremely helpful. And so how we can learn about your diseases without hurting you, right? And so, of course, there's the one extreme that says, I don't want to share anything. And that really slows down medical research, and we start feeling it. And for example, we could figure out this clock because there were public data on tens of thousands of people with their whole genome methylation sequence, right?
Really?
Yeah. And so this is how we figure the clock. This is how Horvath figured the clock, right? Could you imagine, probably tomorrow, with what I'm seeing in the world, this will not be available.
Mm-hmm.
And then there, this, for example, we now generated markers for cancer that we are also trying to develop that might save millions of lives because the NIH has collected methylation data from tens of thousands of cancer patients. And that is available publicly. Of course, it's anonymized. I don't think anyone can recognize who is who there.
Right.
But because of that sharing, millions or billions of lives will be saved.
Amazing.
So we have to understand that this tremendous drive, let's keep everything for ourselves, is going to be countered by another wave is, this is evil, right? It's like saying, I would not give charity, I would keep it for myself. It's my money.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't you give charity? But the system will work if you know that you also get from it, And so assuming that human greed will always be the most driving reward. But I will tell you, give me your data because it will change your life. And you have to see that it does. With Waze, you know immediately that it does.
Oh yeah.
and you might be compromising some of your privacy because people know where you're driving and things like that. Hopefully not. But this is the kind of give and take. So this is the next revolution. We'll have to sort it out. And
it's already happening in some ways, right? Like you've got companies like I don't know if you're aware of Viome, where they're looking at the microbiome.
Yeah.
And so they've been
collecting.
They've been collecting, and their algorithm. I haven't done a Viome test in a couple of years now, but I would guess that their algorithm is way more powerful now than it was when they launched.
For sure.
4 years ago, because now
Absolutely.
they have like exponential amounts.
Right.
So for your app, are you, like, I know that everything is anonymized. Like there's no, once I send that DNA sample off, it off, I don't even think my name was on there. Like everything's numbers and it's buried. And I think
we're building we're trying to put what we call blocks between steps, right? So nobody has access to the entire, somebody needs to know your address. That's the problem because they need to send you the kit.
Yeah.
But that guy who sends you the kit should never know your your identity, your DNA identity. So what we're trying to do is firewall, the private data, your personal data from the medical data. So the medical data is totally anonymized. So we don't want to know where you live, even though it's important. But we say, okay, we give up that, right? Because it could be really interesting to know that, everybody who lives around Stanford is healthier than, people who live. But then we get some information about, for example, I'm not sure we want to know the race. And even though that's important information, of course it's important information, right? So there's always some compromise. And we're working on it. We're a young company. But my goal is, and I keep reminding it to people every day, that we need to get the best solutions to prevent a situation that anybody has the temptation to hack the system so the system should be encrypted, that even if somebody hacked all our entire database, they will not get any names. Or if somebody hacks the names, will not get any data.
Right.
And they will not be able to connect it.
Right.
And so we're building a system where only the customer can connect it through the keys that are generated by the customer and are unknown to us. I'm not saying it's perfect, but this is what has to be done.
Sure.
And probably hackers will figure out ways, and we always have to be one step ahead. Sure. And these are the solutions that we need, to create the next revolution. And all companies are really looking for that. So they can collect this data without fear, and people need to get the confidence that the data is not hacked. And and not used by insurance companies and, you know, by others.
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this. So are you essentially, is this a living, breathing entity that over time I will get more information
So this is the goal, right? It all depends on collaboration. And right, if you don't put data, we won't get data.
I
right?
see. I see.
And I think it will take some time.
Lifestyle questionnaire.
Right.
And, okay.
It will take some time and resources, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not a rich company yet. And so because all what I told you about technology is very expensive.
Sure.
First of all, people who do that are the highest paid people on earth, and they're hard to get. And to find those good solutions, this is what we want to build, right? And this is, I think, the way medicine is going, although there's tremendous resistance to it. When I tell my colleagues, you know, your way of doing clinical trials is passé. Yeah. You know, but still, you know, people are stuck to this, you know,
and it's what
classical system that
was
really developed in the 50s because of problems in the 50s. But really hampers, first of all, it hampers medical progression. And second, it's not necessarily protecting the population because it cannot capture the complexity. You know, drugs are given in a complex interaction, and none of our standard methods can capture it.
Well, even pharmacogenetics, right? We know that depending on certain genes that we carry, what, you know, like a blood thinner is going to act differently on person A than person B. Like, it's amazing to me that that's not fully integrated into the medical system yet, because
we know better. We know better now, and you know, the great advances in cancer treatment came from recognizing that.
Yeah.
For example, the HER2 treatment, the Herceptin treatment in breast cancer, you know, was in the beginning thought useless, and then when they realized who should get it, it became a lifesaver. Right. And I'm sure there are a lot of other medicines like that. But they're just a tidbit of an example, an anecdotal example of the complexity. And the best way to learn about drugs is actually asking people who took the drugs. And we have very limited information, right? You know how many people in the world took aspirin, or how many people took vitamin C? We have no idea what happened to them, right? And we, you know, if we spend $100 million, we'll do a clinical trial, we'll do some epidemiology, but still we don't capture. And now with technology, there's no reason why we can't capture everyone. And so I think, you know, this needs to happen. It will happen.
Yeah.
The question is, who will do it? Private companies or, you know, more public funded entities? It seems that public companies are going,
Right now, I think it's the private companies,
yes,
right?
Yes, because they're always thinking ahead.
Exactly, like, and you have a vested interest in this. So let's go back to to Epi Age and the best way to use the test in the app. So the best way to do this is basically fill out as much of the lifestyle questionnaire as you can, reasonably.
Take it to heart. And try to make changes.
And then repeat. And would you say, is it like a 3-month window enough, or a 6-month window enough? Like,
we don't know. The answer is we don't know, right? First of all, you know, like any test, no test is perfect, right? There is accuracy issues. We've tried to make it as perfect as possible, but nothing is perfect. And imperfection comes from two things. First, from, you know, the machines, the methods, the people who are doing the test, and the person who is sending you a sample. The other imperfection comes from the biological system. It's noisy, right? And so there is noise in our system because life is noisy. Life is not perfect. And so taking more measurements kind of counteracts that. So if they're very frequent, it's almost like a repeat to be sure where you're really standing. If it's more infrequent, if it's less frequent, you might get a better idea of the trajectory, right? Because it's already, time has passed, and you kind of probably beyond the errors of the you know, of the test, but you're already in a place where you should see a change. So, you know, probably every 1 year will make sense, you know, but it depends on you, you know, because you know, we know anecdotes. Hopefully one day we'll have millions of samples and we will be able to better say, you know, it's a learning experience.
Yeah.
And so we should never promise people what we can't deliver, right?
Of course. Well, and I also think that it depends, to your point, how it depends on the person is when you have, for example, in these groups, when you have a population of people who are actively applying different interventions to themselves. Right. So if I say for the next 3 to 6 months, I'm going to alter my diet, I'm going to start I'm going to start taking SAMe, or I don't know, let's say I started taking low dose metformin and I changed my exercise routine, and then I redid the test in 3 to 6 months. I mean, I can't live long enough to do one thing at a time. But right. I might not know exactly which one of those 5 things.
You just want to hit it, yeah.
Created an effect, but I would get an idea that,
right.
Oh, okay, so doing these things generated this result. Either I'm not aging any faster, or maybe the gap has closed a little bit, and kind of move on from there, right? And so I think as individuals now, this gives us a tool, even from a self-assessment perspective.
Right.
Right,
because it's your own test, so you establish your own baseline, right?
Yeah.
And so you can now you're not dependent anymore on the general average. You're dependent on your own trajectory, right?
Yeah.
And so you can slowly start measuring your own trajectory, and actually in the app you'll see that as you go you'll have a trajectory. And I know the app still needs work, and we're trying to perfect it, and it will be perfected by sharing, right? So the only way to develop apps is by hearing. This is the beauty of, by the way, technology, and I think why it moves so fast, because it's attentive, right? So people keep commenting all the time on bugs and things like that, and you can improve it.
Yeah, it's almost like a living entity. It's
yes.
fluid. It's completely fluid.
Yeah. Yes. What I like about it removes the responsibility for your health from your doctor to yourself.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think this is a big change. It's very hard. People still talk about science says that, or science says this, but as a scientist, we know very little. And we learn by experience, right? Science is more about finding what's wrong than what's right? So we know which theories are not true, but it's very hard to know what theory is true. So we can easily reject hypothesis. It's very hard to prove a hypothesis. So essentially, you actually use the language, which is we reject things rather than prove things. And so science is built on trial and error. And what is now accepted as scientific truth might not be tomorrow, and was not yesterday.
Yeah.
And so in the science of humans, we need humans. And the only way we learn about humans is by humans participating in the process. So I think we're going to see a very big transition of self-empowerment, for the first time in history.
I think it's already happening. I mean, that's what all this biohacking movement is about, right? It's about
and classical physicians don't like it.
No.
And a lot of classical people don't like it. And I understand, it's a revolution. I always compare it to the revolution when the book was printed. And I think, the printing of the first book has changed the world, because now it's not only the priest who knows the Bible, everyone can read the Bible.
Right.
And the second thing that changed the world is translating the Bible to colloquial language. It was not in Latin anymore. So these two revolutions, created, of course, the Reformation and other changes, that eventually led to scientific revolutions. But then science became the new religion, right? Because we speak a language nobody understands. We don't even bother to explain it, right? Because the less we explain, the more power we have.
Right.
And so we don't speak Latin, we speak English, but that English of science is completely incomprehensible.
Right.
Not even to lay people. As a scientist, I can only understand, a very small segment of the English that is within my discipline, right? And actually, the same words can mean totally different things in different disciplines.
Right.
And it's quite confusing. Even within medicine, we use the same acronyms for totally different things, which is within one discipline, it means one thing. Within the other discipline, it means something completely different. So the medical science has been broken to sub-disciplines that there are silos that nobody can talk to each other.
Right.
It now came the next thing, which is technology.
Right.
And technology has empowered people. Now every person can go to Google and see if his doctor is saying what his doctor says makes sense or not. Of course, there are those who object that. They say, oh, this person is not qualified, and how do you know if the site is right or wrong? But overall, Wikipedia can teach you medicine probably better than me. And I'm always amazed by that, because, you know, how come a system that just works so randomly and chaotically can actually be true, and most of the time, not 100% of the time, right? And that process that technology enabled, which is partnership in learning and partnership in sharing, is going to encounter a lot of resistance, but eventually will take over.
Yeah.
And old establishments will be shattered, and like happened, you know, with the printing of the book, and new powers will take over. But and here is society has to take control over it by making sure that they share,
right, and own a piece of it, right?
Even so if you give data, you want to get something back. Exactly. Otherwise, don't give your data.
Yeah. So the epiAge app essentially will, as it grows, will become this kind of, hopefully, good source.
First, you immediately get your report, right? When and hopefully it will improve. So the idea is you immediately get it will be live, and so, you know, when trends are figured out, they will be shared. And you know, we hope to develop algorithms where you can put your own data on the general data and see, you know, what you should do to get a better outcome.
Right.
And also measures of outcome should be more diverse, right? So, you know, biological aging is one, but there are others. You know, blood pressure is a very good one. You know, heart rate is a good one. Stress levels are a good one.
Yeah.
You know, sleep duration is a good one, because usually when you have problems, you don't sleep.
Or sleep quality. Wow. So a lot of us, like, so this ring measures my sleep quality.
Right. So if we can collect that, this is another outcome, right? It's a more proximal outcome. So, you know, as we learn, it's not just us, but as you know, the community learns and integrates, you know, more and more kind of ways to assess where we are. But, you know, I have a strong emphasis on the mental health, because I think mental health is very critical for our physical health, not just for our mental health.
It's a massive epigenetic influencer of the genome. Like, it's,
and we underestimate it because it doesn't look real, right? And we are in a materialistic world, but it's very real.
Yeah.
It's very chemical. It's very materialistic.
Yeah.
And I'm not touching the soul, because that's not our business here, but the machine of our brain is very real.
Absolutely.
And it's very attentive to what we feel. And so, you know, we always have to, you know, weigh everything, right? Risk versus benefits, right? The mental side of things has to be put into the equation, right? So if going to the gym stresses the hell out of you and makes your life miserable, so probably you shouldn't go to the gym.
Yeah, find something else.
Right. Or organize your life in a different way that you'll have time to go to the gym. And so, you know, and different people like different things. We know not everybody likes exercising on machines. You know, some people prefer to walk. Some people prefer to take the stairs, you know. So taking your car to drive to a gym doesn't make much sense, right? Why don't you just walk?
Yeah.
And so in a materialistic world that we live, we like easy solutions, right? I want a chemical.
Yeah.
I want to sit on a machine that will make my muscles work, right? But yes, it might be good, not always. So we have to, and that's where the mental comes, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the environment, like there's, I know that in your TED talk, you talk about, you give an example of an event that happened that influenced the babies of the mother's health. Like, so
the ice storm in Quebec.
Yeah. The ice storm. Yeah. So you talk about the ice storm in Quebec, and there's another one that other people talk about. That was a starvation.
The Dutch famine. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the environment that the baby evolves in before birth, and that is not just it's the emotional environment, which ultimately has chemical repercussions on that baby that influence
Yeah.
the way the baby's, I guess, if you will, the way their genes, their genetic, their genes evolve, and it affects them and possibly their offspring.
Right.
And so would you think something like, I mean, I was wondering the other day, like, look at what's going on in California right now.
Right.
And it's now taking on like massive proportion. Like, we're not just talking about a fire. We're talking about people's very existence.
Of course.
Being challenged.
This is extremely stressful. Yeah.
Not to mention the physical reality of the smoke and the toxins and the.
Yeah. Probably the stress is worse than the toxin.
Sure. And
because stress releases, glucocorticoid hormones, which is a real chemical, and it does a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Some good things and bad things.
Yeah. Well, anyway, all really interesting stuff. So anyway, well, listen, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with people about this?
I think they
should know, or
it's enough for today.
System, keep inflammation down, take care of your body and your environment. But is there anything else you'd like to share with people, or?
No, I think a balance of, taking care of your mental environment, whatever it is, and it's different to different people. What stresses somebody makes somebody else relaxes.
Yeah.
Individualization. You personally have to be personally attentive to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that humans are very complex, and so you have to listen to your own clock. And the biological clock is just one tool, but it's not the ultimate tool. And I think advice that comes both from good medical advice, but also good historical advice, right? We have to learn from our ancestors. This is something we stopped doing because we revolutionized technology. But humans have evolved with ways of doing things that are probably useful. So before we throw something, learn from your grandmothers and great grandmothers, and from communities that have more ancestral information, because human evolution is not just in our genes, it's also in our behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And we evolve behaviors that were good for us, otherwise they would not survive. And so the concept of selection tells us that a lot of things survive because they were useful.
Right.
And before we throw them away, we need to be attentive. So, being attentive to the complexity of life, understanding it's not one chemical or one behavior that is going to sort out things. And that's a reinforcement process. You learn all your life how to live your life better in all dimensions. And that self-learning is the big difference between those who make it better and those who don't, right? If you give up on self-learning, you give up on life. You have to constantly learn.
Yeah.
You take your failures not as failures, but as just a guide to a new stage of learning.
The next step. Yeah. Absolutely. And this is, and then, just to bring it back to this test and this app, this is just yet another tool on that, on that trajectory of self-learning and feedback, if you will, of things that you can't see, that can hopefully help you along and help everybody else while you're at it, right? As to your point, as you're gathering, creating a bigger and bigger group to measure gains. All right. Well, Dr. Szyf, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And so for people who are interested in looking into this test, it's the epiGene. Actually, you know what? I'll put the links, because I know there's different links for Canada and for international.
Right.
So
Canada, international, and US is a different one as well. Right.
Yeah. So I'll put the different links, but it's the epiAge test.
Yeah.
And in Canada, I know it's epigene.ca, I believe. But anyway, like I said, I'll put them down there. So thank you so much, Dr. Szyf. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. If you're ready to start quantifying and measuring the effects of your latest and greatest anti-aging or healthy aging strategies, then head on over to epiage.com. That's epi-age.com. Use promo code longevity so that you can order your kit today and get started. Remember that this is a long game. So you're going to measure to get your baseline. You're going to apply your intervention. And then you're going to measure again in another 3 to 6 months, depending on how intensely you're going to be changing your lifestyle. So once again, it's epi-age.com. And please remember to leave us a review and a rating on iTunes, because this is what helps us to rank and what helps us to bring you even more amazing guests week after week. If you're looking to connect with me, either because you have questions or because you'd like to work with me, then you can find me at natalienidham.com. That's my website, or on Facebook at the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Group. Look forward to seeing you there.